Good morning, Gaza. Good morning, Gaza. This was the wake-up call sent in by Israel. Growing up in Gaza isn't easy. Not far away, nowhere is far away in this scrap of land, is the rubble left by the Israeli strike on Sunday that killed 10 members of the Dalu family, including 4 children under 7, and 2 neighbors. They were looking for the remains of a teenage girl who's missing, assumed dead. This man called Mazen is a relative of the dead.
Maybe sad, maybe strong. Maybe sad, maybe strong.
We're getting tougher, he said, more solid. And when they kill the parents of a boy, he will look for revenge.
During the last 2 years, the Arab-Israeli conflict has been overshadowed by the dramatic changes elsewhere in the Middle East. During the time I was outside the headlines, though, the differences between the two sides, if anything, got sharper. What makes this crisis difficult and dangerous is the fact that it's happening in a region that is more unstable than at any time since the 1950s.
The Israeli attack on Gaza, which occurred immediately after the American elections, was timed. It did not take place by accident. It was timed to occur after the US elections. It was not the first attack on Gaza, and it will not be the last. It was a brutal attack. And those who say that they follow the religion of Abraham, Ibrahim alayhi salam, who say that they are Jews, are actually betraying the Jewish faith by acting in a barbarian way, with utmost cruelty upon a largely defenseless people. It's not going to be pretty for a Jew to be hearing that it was a battle between David and Goliath. But this time, David, or Dawood alayhi salam, is with the Muslims who follow Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. They acted after the US elections so that they could begin the process of putting pressure on the American regime. Incrementally, now that Obama has been re-elected, so that the American regime in this second term will follow a script that Israel will design. It was brutal because they want to destroy Gaza bit by bit in order to break the will of the people to resist. The Palestinian will for resistance has been shining beautifully all these years. They have suffered and suffered and suffered indescribably at the heart of this heartless brute, but it has not broken their will. This wanton destruction is not so wanton. it is actually calculated. They send their missiles targeting particular institutions, particular buildings, particular facilities, in order to make the quality of life for the people of Gaza increasingly unbearable. They have a blockade of Gaza, which has been going on for so many years now. What they are planning, it appears to me, is to try to so escalate the oppression on Gaza that the next time around, we'll come back to this time in a moment, that the next time around, or maybe the one that follows the next time, would be such a monstrously wicked attack, such a brutal attack, that the people will have to flee. And because you no longer have Hosni Mubarak in Egypt to block the way, and you have a friendly regime in Egypt, Ikhwan al-Muslimun, it would facilitate what the Jews call, and it's there in the Bible, it's one of the books of the 5 books of Moses, it's called Exodus. The Jews had an exodus out of Egypt, back to the Holy Land. This is an exodus of Palestinians from Gaza to Egypt. That seems to be the ethnic cleansing plan that they have in store for Gaza. And maybe after they finish with Gaza, they will then turn to the West Bank. What do we do in such a situation the next time around, when their jets start sending missiles into Gaza, and then they plan a ground invasion into Gaza? What do we do? The answer is, at least, if nothing else, women and children, and the elderly and the handicapped should be allowed to make hijrah. At least. If you do not allow them to make hijrah, if you keep them captive in Gaza, you are betraying the sunnah of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, who, when he found his community under such attack in Mecca, he advised them hijrah, and they made hijrah to Medina. And so hijrah is the sunnah when you are faced with persecution that is unbearable. That is what Hamas has to study, and Hamas has to decide. And tonight we are warning Hamas that if you do not allow the hijrah of the women and the children and the elderly and the handicapped, if you do not allow that, then the blood of your mothers and your sisters and your daughters and your children, and the next attack come, will be on you. Will be on you. You have no excuse for not having hijrah when you have a brotherly Ikhwan government in Egypt. If you do not want to make hijrah, you want to remain and fight Israel, you can do that until you realize that you could no longer bear it. But you have no excuse for not allowing your women and your children and your elderly and the handicapped to make hijrah to Egypt. The next comment we have to make is that Hugo Chavez in Venezuela responded to the Israeli attack on Gaza, the last attack on Gaza in November, by abolishing all visa restrictions for Palestinians to enter Venezuela. Shame on the world of Islam. Shame on the world of Islam. that Hugo Chavez in Venezuela should do what the world of Islam should have done a long time ago. So we call tonight, and we ask all those who hear this call to lend their voices to the call and to mobilize this call, that governments around the world of Islam should set the example and remove all visa restrictions for Palestinians wishing to make hijrah out of Gaza, at least, out of Palestine as a whole. When they come and they seek refugee status, then the decent thing to do is to grant them refugee status. Having said that, we can now turn to a more detailed analysis of the attack on Gaza. The last one took place in December 2008.
من الصف انفجارات لو جينا نزل لو الناس تصوتوا طلاب المدارس في منهم من حالة الرعب والخوف. بالنسبة للسكان المحيط أضرار جميع المكان، يعني الإصابات في عدد من الشهداء، عدد من الإصابات بشكل كبير. يعني الآن مش محدد غير كم شيء. في عدد من الشهداء تحت المباني المهدمة.
كنا عند باب المدرسة، كنا قاعدين احنا وبنات الصفي وانهم اجت الدب واحنا خفنا وشردنا برا المدرسة والناس قالت لنا روحوا شفنا حريقة روحونا من عند شارع الداخلي.
قاعدين في الموقع اجى الطيران فشفنا كل الموقع فيه عليه وجت جنبي من هنا 4 مقطعين وما ادري ايش عندي غير انا في المستشفى.
And it took place after the American elections, which Barack Obama won. But in December, George Bush was still the president until January 20th. So the blistering attack on Gaza that took place 4 years ago in December, which killed, I think, about 1,400 innocent people, was meant to take advantage or to exploit a vacuum when you have the changing of the guards. Exploit that vacuum to deliver a blistering blow on Gaza that Gaza will not forget. And in order to prepare the American regime for what is to come. And of course, Obama then followed suit for 4 years, remaining like a puppy dog of Israel. The one thing that Obama did not do these last 4 years, because the American military did not want it, was to attack Iran. We don't know how long the American government will be able to hold off. But so far the attack on Iran has not taken place. This time around, the attack on Gaza lasted for a brief moment. I think just for a few days. And then something strange happened, connected with the Arab Spring. This was not the first Arab Spring. There was another Arab Spring 100 years ago. And that Arab Spring resulted in the demise of the Ottoman Islamic Empire and brought into Arabia a puppet regime of the Zionists, the Saudi Wahhabi regime, and brought to the forefront the Protestant version of Islam, the Wahhabi version of Islam, today is called the Salafi version of Islam. That Arab Spring also brought puppets into Jordan and to Iraq and Syria and so on, and brought about a transformation in the Arab for Israel to control. And Israel has exploited the heartland of Islam, Arabia, for 100 years now, with a conveniently friendly regime in control of Arabia, the Saudi Wahhabi regime. This Arab Spring, we came to the conclusion, was meant to prepare the way for Arab slaughter. Because we felt that Dajjal's day, like a month, was coming to an end, and our listening audience, of course, would have to go to my book, Jerusalem in the Quran, to understand a day like a month. And that Dajjal's day, like a week, is about to commence. In Dajjal's day, like a year, Britain became the ruling state in the world. And the sterling pound became the international currency. So there was a link between power and money. And then in Dajjal's day, like a month, the United States replaced Britain as the ruling state in the world. And the US dollar replaced the sterling pound. And now that a day which is like a month is coming to an end, and the day which is like a week is about to commence, Israel is about to replace the United States as the ruling state in the world. And the US dollar is in irreversible decline. You don't need a PhD in monetary economics to understand that the US dollar is in irreversible decline. And this is not happening by accident. It is a planned demolition job that's taking place. But you'll only understand that when you look at the subject through the eyes of Islamic eschatology, ilmu akhirul zaman. In order for Israel to take over as the next ruling state in the world, Israel has to establish its political and economic dominion over the Arabs. Israel cannot do that without waging great wars. But Israel does not want to wage great wars and appear to be an aggressor. No. Dajjal has a PhD in deception. And so Israel needs what is called casus bellum, a justification for waging war. That justification is that the Arab Spring should result in Islamic governments taking control of the Arab world. And when the so-called Islamic governments take control of the Arab world, these Islamic governments must then be portrayed as a threat to Israel, and that Islam is menacing the world. A dual threat. A threat to Israel and a threat to the world, to mankind. At the heart of the Arab world is Egypt. And so the plan was to ensure that the Mubarak regime would topple and that Ikhwan will take over. And on Judgment Day we'll see, and I hope Ikhwan is listening to me. On Judgment Day we'll see the negotiations that took place between Washington and Ikhwan. What did Washington say to Ikhwan? We will know it one day, Ikhwan. It will come out in the open. What kind of deal was offered? What kind of a deal was offered? Is it that you're going to come to power in Egypt? And that we're going to help you to come to... One day we will know. It's going to come out in the open. But the plan worked. And the elections came. And Ikhwan won the election. We do not begrudge Ikhwan al-Muslimun. They stood up very strongly against the oppression of Jamal Abdel Nasser. They suffered and they suffered and they suffered, but they could not be broken. Many of them became shuhada. And then when the oppression of Jamal Abdel Nasser ended with the death of Jamal Abdel Nasser, then Hosni Mubarak took over. And again the Ikhwan suffered and suffered and suffered and suffered. And so perhaps when the offer was made, it was like a ray of sunshine after all this long period of darkness. And so the elections led predictably so to Ikhwan victory. We knew it before. But even though Ikhwan won the elections, there were two formidable obstacles in their way of taking control of Egypt. One was the military, and the other was the judiciary. And now I ask my listening audience, it seems curious to me that just towards the end of Ramadan, conveniently so, 14 Egyptian, or was it 16 Egyptian police officers in Gaza, in Sinai, were killed in a commando raid.
Tell us a little bit more about the attack, the motive behind the attack, and what is the situation in the Sinai? It's a very lawless place.
Well, that's exactly right, Michael. This is a very lawless place, and since Egypt's revolution, there has really been a security vacuum in Sinai. What we're hearing is that 35 militants attacked an army outpost, killing 16 people and injuring 7, and this comes from the military. And this is really an unprecedented attack. We've never seen militant groups actually attack the army before. In the past, they have attacked the police. So this is an escalation of attacks in Sinai. And what President Mohamed Morsi said earlier, that Sinai is secure and that it's under complete control, well, that'll be a very difficult thing to do. And if he has already done it, that's a very quick move, because Sinai has been unstable since the revolution. You have militants with heavy artillery, or heavy weaponry there, and so to secure it this quickly would really be quite a feat, Michael.
And what from your side of the border is the perceived motive, and where did these guys come from?
So what the army is saying is that these militants came from Gaza and that they attacked the soldiers. A lot of very conservative Islamic groups that have had a past of jihad activities have condemned these attacks. The motives behind it and who is behind it isn't quite clear yet, but this is definitely an unprecedented attack against Egypt's military. And there has been a lot of strong condemnation from all across Egyptian society, and as well as Hamas has condemned these attacks. So while this attack is one of the largest we've seen, it does come with a lot of condemnation.
The smell smells like Mossad. It smells like Mossad. And Ikhwan commented and said they felt it was also Israel responsible. So I am on firm grounds. So was it Israel helping? Because immediately after the killing of those police officers, the Egyptian government was able to cut the military down to size. And the defense minister was sacked, the most powerful man in Egypt. The defense minister was sacked, dismissed, and the armed forces chief of staff was dismissed.
Supporters of President Mohamed Morsi filled Tahrir Square to celebrate their leader's newfound political muscle. On Sunday, Morsi ordered the retirement of the country's defense minister, Field Marshal Hussein Tantawi, as well as the army chief of staff. The shakeup has sharply shifted the balance of power between the military brass and the president. Just days before Morsi took office, the military stripped the presidency of many of its key functions. Some say Morsi has now grabbed too much control, especially considering the country's lack of parliament.
It's feared that the president's assumption of political, executive and military powers, in addition to legislative power, will in the end allow room for the president to act as a dictator.
Others say Morsi is simply trying to take back the president's rightful powers.
This power is an exception. In my most recent meeting with the president, he expressed the need for a parliament as quickly as possible to play the role of the legislative authority and to monitor the executive authority.
The dismissals have helped bolster Morsi's image as a leader, but analysts say the show of force may have been agreed to with the military in exchange for protection from prosecution. The U.S., Egypt's main backer, said it was unperturbed by Morsi's military shakeup. If unchallenged, Morsi's move could end 6 decades of de facto military rule in the country.
And Ikhwan was able to appoint their own people. And they got away with it. For the first time in more than 60 years, the Egyptian armed forces were cut down to size. 60 years since 1952, the revolution that toppled Farouk. After some 60 years, for the first time, the Egyptian military is cut down to size. And Ikhwan is gaining more power in the country. That's curious to me. There's something more to this than meets the eye. One day we'll know. But there is still another obstacle in the way, and that's the judiciary. And they're a powerful obstacle. And then I found, it's curious, isn't it? It's curious, isn't it? That as soon as Israel launches its blitzkrieg on Gaza, and the whole world is watching the Palestinians being devastated with Israeli missiles, along comes the Egyptian president to broker a ceasefire between the oppressor and the oppressed. But excuse me, I thought that Islam came to liberate the oppressed and to oppose oppression. I didn't know that Islam came to broker a ceasefire between oppressor and oppressed. Come on, Ikhwan, please teach me what is Islam. This sounds to me ridiculous. And as soon as the Egyptian president was able to successfully broker this ceasefire or truce between the oppressor and the oppressed, immediately after that, he takes over and cuts the judiciary down to size. And then comes out with the referendum on the Constitution.
A body set up to write Egypt's new constitution following last year's ousting of leader Hosni Mubarak has approved its final draft. After an all-night marathon session, the assembly backed all 234 articles, including those that keep Islamic or Sharia law as the main source of legislation. Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi will be presented the draft on Saturday. He must then put it to a popular referendum within 15 days. The opposition boycotted the Constitution Commission as it's dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamist group that backed Morsi for president. His opponents claimed the draft has been rushed amid a political crisis which saw Morsi award himself sweeping new powers. Further protests are expected in Cairo today by pro- and anti-Morsi activists.
This time, however, it doesn't seem as though it's working. This time it doesn't seem as though it's working. But it all sounds to me as though the dots are coming together. The dots are coming together. That what the Zionists want is an Ikhwan government that will be fully in control of Egypt. So that when Ikhwan is fully in control of Egypt, an Islamic government, they can then put the blame on Egypt for terrorism, supporting the Palestinians, for example, becoming a terrorist state, threatening Israel, and that the Arabs are rising up and menacing Israel and so on, and that Israel can then wage her great wars. This is my analysis of Gaza.
In favor, 138.
The result is clear. The consequences of the vote are not.
Abstentions.
It was expected the United Nations General Assembly would overwhelmingly back the idea of enhanced Palestinian status. And it did. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas made his case, insisting he was trying to save the peace process, not end it.
We did not come here to add further complications to the peace process, which Israel's policies have thrown into the intensive care unit. Rather, we came to launch a final, serious attempt to achieve peace.
The Israelis knew this was a vote they were likely to lose, but they still called on the Assembly to reject the idea, attacking the Palestinian president and the plan.
For as long as President Abbas prefers symbolism over reality, as long as he prefers to travel to New York for UN resolutions, rather than travel to Jerusalem for genuine dialogue, any hope of peace will be out of reach.
The Palestinian support came from across the globe, South American, Asian and Europeans casting their vote in favour. There were 9 votes against, the most significant, the USA.
Today's unfortunate and counterproductive resolution places further obstacles in the path to peace. That is why the United States voted against it.
The United Nations organization is an international organization which is a successor to the League of Nations. These two international organizations were created by the ruling powers in the world, the European ruling powers. And they were created to function in such a way as to facilitate European rule over the world. The European rule over the world was meant to advance the Zionist agenda, Dajjal's agenda. But you'd only know that through Islamic eschatology. The Charter of the United Nations Organization established a Security Council of the United Nations and gave to the Security Council supreme authority in the world in all matters pertaining to international peace and security. And who defines what is peace and security? The Security Council defines that. But the Sharia of Islam does not allow us to submit to any authority other than to Allah as supreme authority, particularly in matters pertaining to war and peace. And so membership in the United Nations organization is clearly, plainly, as plain as daylight, in conflict with the Sharia. It is disgraceful, really, and I feel so sad to have to use such harsh language. It is disgraceful that Islamic scholarship has never as yet responded to the Charter of the United Nations Organization. That the scholars of Islam have yet to point out that there is a conflict between the Charter of the UN and the Sharia, and that membership of Muslim countries in the United Nations Organization is in conflict with the Sharia, number one, and it is meant to facilitate the Zionist quest to rule the world, number two. About 12 years ago, just before 9/11, you had an Islamic emirate in Afghanistan and they were claiming that they were the Khilafah and that Mullah Umar was Amirul Mu'mineen. But the United Nations would not recognize them. as the legal representatives of the Afghan people. No, although they were in control of the country. And these Muslims who said that they represented the purest Islam on the face of the earth, they were begging the United Nations to admit them. Begging the United Nations to allow us to become members, to be recognized as members, so that we will betray the Sharia, so we could enter into the arms of the Zionists. This is the pathetic state of Islamic scholarship in the world today. As it was in Afghanistan, the same blindness is there in Palestine, except that this one in Palestine is worse, in that Allah has warned in the Quran, in Surah Al-Anbiya, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولقد كتبنا في الزبور من بعد ذكر أن الأرض يرثها عبادي الصالحون, that only my righteous servants will inherit the earth. That includes most of all Al-Ardul Muqaddasa. Al-Ardul Muqaddasa. So you cannot establish a secular state in the Holy Land and expect that you can survive Allah's wrath. The Jews know that. Why? How come the Muslims don't know that? The Jews are going to transform Israel from a secular democracy to a monarchy tomorrow, because the Jews know that they have to establish a replica of what Dawood alayhi salam and Sulaiman alayhi salam had, in order for it to be recognized as Holy Israel. And the Palestinians are beating the drums and celebrating, establishing a state which is a secular state, which is far removed from Holy Israel of Dawood alayhi salam and Sulaiman alayhi salam. So I believe they're being taken for a ride, deaf, dumb and blind. My language is harsh. I feel sad to use this harsh language, but when there are very, very few voices in the world today pointing to the reality of things, we have to speak loudly to be heard.
الحالي هذا الحالي اي نعم اللي عليه وهذا توسعه مع المدخل، وكذلك هذا التوسعه الكبرى اللي بالقبله بالقبله
قبلة فين
على يمين القبلة كان يصير على يمين المحراب يصير على يمين من الناحية الجنوبية والناحية الغربية.
غربي جنوبي.
غربي جنوبي.
ويعني هذا حاليا. هذا الآن.
هذا الحالي. هذا الحالي. وهذا الجديد الكتلة هذه والكتلة هذه والكتلة الشمالية هذه. واللي من جانب هناك ساحة.
هذا حالي. بس أنا ما هي معجبتني.
A scholar from Jordan sent a message to me after he heard my analysis of a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is in the Sunan of Abi Dawood, that the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, umranu baytul maqdis kharabu yathrib. Kharabu yathrib khuruj al-malhama. Khuruj al-malhama fathul Constantiniya. Fathul Constantiniya khuruj al-dajjal. That at that time when Jerusalem will be flourishing and built up, at that time Medina would be in a state of destruction, buildings being destroyed, and in a state of forlorn destitution, desolation. And at that time when buildings are being destroyed and in a state of forlorn desolation, at that time look for the Malhama, the Great War. So we are on the doorstep now of that Great War, because the buildings are being destroyed in Medina. That's what the Saudis are doing. And also in Mecca. In addition to that, Medina has no status in the world today. It plays no role, none whatsoever, in the affairs of the world of Islam. None, zero. Nor in international affairs. It's in a state of forlorn desolation with buildings being destroyed. So we are on the doorstep of the Malhama. Perhaps within the next few months, the monstrously misguided government of Turkey, again so sad that I have to use this violent language, but mine has been a voice in the wilderness for too long, and the house is burning down, so someone has to speak. The monstrously misguided Turkish government, which is in the embrace of NATO and comfortable about it, would be tricked or will be urged and coaxed into attack on Syria. And if Turkey attacks Syria, I have said there's going to be civil war in Turkey, and Russia will attack Turkey. And when Russia attacks Turkey, Eastern Europe, Byzantine Eastern Europe will join with Russia, and then Muslims will support Russia against NATO to liberate Constantinople. That is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And once there is a conflict between Russia and NATO, that's the world war, that's Malhama, that's around the corner. And so the Saudis are doing what the Prophet has already prophesied with the destruction of buildings. Not only that, when the US dollar finally collapses, it's already collapsed, it's being kept alive with maybe the, what do you call it, the pump that keeps the heart pumping. Yeah, it's already finished, it died, but they kept keeping it alive. When the US dollar finally collapses, they are going to destroy it. They have to bring something to replace it. The US dollar is not just a US dollar today. It has functioned since 1971, or 73 rather, as the US petrodollar. And if you listen to my lecture at the Riba conference on Islam, the petrodollar and beyond, you will understand how the US dollar became a petrodollar. The Prophet ﷺ prophesied it. It's just our incapacity to be able to read and understand the ahadith pertaining to Akhirul Zaman. He said that the river Euphrates will uncover a mountain of gold. What he meant by that was that an ocean of oil will function as a mountain of gold. When the ocean of oil functioned to back the US dollar, when King Faisal was tricked into agreeing that oil will be sold for only US dollar, which is in conflict with the Sharia. Conflict with the Sharia because Islam gives a free and a fair market. And also, not only you violating the free market, you're violating the fair market because the US dollar is not redeemable in gold anymore. It's just paper. That's all. As soon as Faisal was tricked into that in 1973, that oil will be sold for only US dollar, the US dollar began to fly high, flying high. For the next 40 years, the petrodollar. And now the Zionists are bringing it down. Something has to replace it. And that is the electronic and digital money controlled by the banking system. But that new money also has to be petro money, backed by oil. And the only way that Israel will be able to control money is if Israel will have the same relationship with Saudi Arabia that the United States had. And so we are seeing before our eyes the alliance of Saudi Arabia and Israel, the alliance of Qatar and Israel blossoming forth. Did the Prophet not say, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, that out of Najd will come the horns of shaitan, qarn of shaitan? The Saudi regime, the Wahhabi roots are from Najd. And so this is my response to the role playing by Saudi Arabia, which has now become one of Israel's most strategic allies in the world. It's time for the world of Islam to recognize a spade and call it a spade. My advice to those who are in Britain, because most of the listening audience will be from Britain, but I know many in France are also listening, in Belgium. My advice is, if you can make hijrah out of NATO member states, make the hijrah. Because of the Quran, because of Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 51, where Allah says, وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّهُ مِنْكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ, that if you enter into friendship and alliance with them, you belong to them. If you're living in Britain and you are hostile to Britain and to British policies, you are in danger. You're in danger. Because the Zionists are going to cut you down. So you're going to have to water down your profile in order to survive, to keep your job, to keep your house, to keep your children at school. But if you want to live authentically as a Muslim, you should not be diluting your faith. And so make hijrah. Try to get out of these NATO member states. And if you cannot get out, then at least get out of the cities and go to the remote countryside. When you get out of London and you fly back to Pakistan, because your parents migrated from Pakistan, and you reach to Karachi, you find the same thing. The way of life is the same way of life. It's like Gog and Magog everywhere. There is universal corruption everywhere. There's violence, there's traffic jam, nothing works. And don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. Dajjal controls the cities around the world. And because of riba, he's brought Pakistan to its knees in poverty. When I went to Pakistan in 1964 as a student, $1 US was convertible into 1.70 rupees, I believe, 1 rupee 70 paisas or something like that. Today, $1 US is almost 100 rupees. This collapse of the rupee is collapse of the wealth of the country and the embrace of poverty. You don't need a PhD to understand that. So when there's abject poverty and destitution, you're going to have all of this chaos because people are being oppressed. So don't expect that you'll make hijrah to Karachi and be able to live comfortably. No. No. What you do is you head for the Pakistani countryside. Look for places where there is arable land, fertile land. And if you cannot get it in the plains, then head for the mountainsides. Pakistan has lots of mountains, plenty mountains. The Prophet said, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, the time will come when a believer, in order to preserve his faith, his Islam, will have to flee to the mountainsides where rain falls, meaning withdraw from society, meaning withdraw from society. Flee to the mountainside where rain falls. Take with him some sheep and goats, sustenance, okay? And so what we have done is we have advised building Muslim villages in the remote countryside. And that these villages should be small, must produce your own food, so you're not dependent on others for food. And you must produce pure food like you used to eat when you were children, or your grandfather's time. The food you ate at that time was tasty. This one looks like garbage. The fruit you used to eat was sweet. This one looks like plastic. And so food is being corrupted today. So you plant your own food. You do not use chemical fertilizers. You use organic farming. And when you build your Muslim community in the remote countryside, establish Islam in that community. You must be one jama'ah. You must have an amir. You must establish the deen in that jama'ah. This book of my teacher, The Quranic Foundations and Structure of Muslim Society, was written by my teacher Maulana Dr. Muhammad Fadlur Rahman Ansari rahimahullah in 2 volumes. 2 volumes, mashallah, and we have spent about 5 years to reprint this book in a new format. In this book, particularly in volume 2, what Maulana has done is to classify all your duties and all your rights as Muslims. Your political life, your economic life, your social life, and so on. And so this book is the handbook, the manual for establishing the Muslim village in the remote countryside. This is my advice for Muslims living in NATO member countries.